Yeah, just want to get started with some information about the data that underpins this. Maybe you've taken our developer program leaders survey. Maybe you haven't. Maybe this is all new to you. But the point of this survey is to kind of fill in the gaps. We spend a lot of time talking to developers, and that is, one very important side of the coin here. But also the developer program leaders survey gives us some insights into what our colleagues are doing and what other people in the industry are doing. So, we will be doing another survey wave of this sometime in the next 5 or 6 months. But for now, I'm going to give you a quick intro into who Slash Data is and then get into kind of the meat of this data and kind of pull up some insights here. So Slash Data is a developer-focused analyst company. Our aim is to help the world understand developers. We do this by surveying lots of developers every year, many different software sectors, and we do this to understand who developers are through population sizing and segmentations, to understand what they buy and why, so why they're adopting products and how you can incentivize them to adopt your own products, and where they're going, such as what emerging platforms they're using and which technologies they begin to use as well. As I said, we do this through our biannual developer survey. We reach over 30,000 developers every year in 2 survey waves. And we have just begun designing our 25th global wave. So that is, we're into year 13 here. We reach developers in nearly every country in the world. And with this, we do a lot of research studies. And in order to keep our sample as pure and as robust as possible, we do this with 80 or more different partners to get a full reach. And we change these partners every time. We aim to capture developers in these development areas, all the big ones, mobile, desktop, web, but also looking into these emerging areas too, like augmented and VR and machine learning and data science. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the data that Slash Data collects on developers. So now let's take a look at the Developer Program Leaders Survey and the results of this. So what we see from this data is that actually data really underpins the strategy for obviously many businesses, regardless of if they're in DevRel or not. But actually, when we look as well at measuring success in developer relations, we see that there's a vast amount of KPIs that are used by people in different disciplines within DevRel. So we can see here for those in developer marketing, developer relations, developer tooling, and Orange, that there's like the range of KPIs and data used to measure success and to strategize here is absolutely vast. There are big differences in the types of data that are used. For example, we see that those in dev tooling really heavily focus on SDK downloads, satisfaction, SDK downloads, GitHub activity, and product usage, which those in marketing much less so. But here, this is just a snapshot of the breadth of data that helps to inform our actions and our strategy as we try to improve. And we also see from our survey results that many developer relations practitioners are data literate. So we asked what are the preferred research formats, and interactive data dashboards with filtering capability. Nearly 2 in 5 selected this. 3 in 10 selected raw data that you can analyze yourself, and 13% selected Excel files with summary data tables. And this tells me that DevRel practitioners, by and large, are confident using data, using these interactive data dashboards to kind of self-serve these questions, and 3 in 10 actually wanting the raw row by row data so they can analyze it themselves or with in-house teams. And so this shows there's real high levels of data literacy amongst this group. There's these short PowerPoints and key insights and long form research are still very important as well, not to say, but there is a thread of data literacy that runs through this discipline. But we do see that despite this, researching often falls down the list of priorities. And when we ask our respondents which activities take up the most budget, time, or effort, we see that researching, staying up to date, actually takes up about less than half of the budget, time, or effort that creating a developer strategy does, or marketing content production, or organizing developer events. So we know from what we've previously seen that actually, understanding data and through that understanding developers is really important. we have seen that developer relations practitioners are often confident or comfortable doing that, but that actually the time that you can allocate to this important activity is sometimes not as much as you would like to. And we see this reflected in not only in the usage of the data, but also in acquiring it. 4 in 10 developer relations practitioners face challenges in acquiring or using this data. So these are kind of data-related challenges in blue here, defining metrics, KPIs, or return on investment, finding useful data, research, or information, and justifying budget. This justifying budget, I've classified this as a data-related challenge because with the right data, you can certainly justify your budget. And so, these aren't, of course, the most salient challenges, but taken together, 40% selected at least one of these. We see that actually sourcing and using data is definitely a challenge for people in this industry. And if we want to touch on the main challenges such as attracting new users and keeping community members engaged, this is definitely an interesting topic. But data is also it's a really key feature here. And to kind of further this point, we see that many data sources are underutilized by developer relations practitioners, and it was this data point that kind of inspired me to talk about this topic. This data point right here is that we see that 23% of our respondents don't analyze their own telemetry data. And to me, this is a huge data gap. The telemetry and usage data is a massive and important lever that you can pull to really make the developer experience as good as possible. And 25%, 23% is not insignificant. But actually, we see this replicated on all of these data sources. Quantitative research, nearly a third aren't. Nearly 3 in 10 aren't doing this. Same for competitive analysis or quantitative research. Nearly half aren't doing desk research. So, we're seeing that data is important. Many people have the skills to analyze it and recognize its importance, but there is a gap in what can be done and what is being done. And this could be a research gap. It's also this could be a funding gap. This could be a time gap. But there's something happening here that is not allowing us to make the best of the data that we have available to us. And despite this, data underpins how the majority of us understand developers. This kind of brings us back around to data is very important here. And we know this because we see that 17% don't use data to differentiate or segment developers. Flipped around, we see that 83% do use data points to segment and to understand developers. So the majority of our respondents here recognize the importance in data in understanding developers. And there's an average of 2.8 data sources being used to segment developers. And this brings us to the end of this kind of short little story here. And I wanted to kind of pull all of my points together into a thread for you here. And we saw first that data underpins business strategy and it's really fundamental for measuring success across all disciplines in developer relations. And there's actually a lot of different data sources being used. And because of this, maybe many DevRel practitioners are very data literate and are comfortable using raw data. But researching does often fall down the list of priorities for budget, time, and effort. And actually, this challenge extends to acquiring or using data, which results in many data sources being underutilized by DevRel practitioners. Important data sources such as telemetry and usage data. And this is all despite it being widely recognized that data is the foundation on how the majority of us understand developers through segmentation and audience research. So I want to leave you with this kind of iffy little graph. I really enjoyed this. And this is the path from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And you've probably seen something like this before, but we know that data isn't the answer, but it is certainly the foundation on which you can build the knowledge, insight, and wisdom that you need for this continuous competitive improvement. So that brings me to the end of this short presentation. I hope that has sparked some interesting thoughts for you and some interesting topics to discuss. We have more resources at devrelx.com and some free developer data at /data.co if you'd like to scratch that data itch. And I must also say a big thank you to our community partners who helped us with this survey as well. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, I will open the floor to questions or discussion or or whatever you want, really. I'm here to answer your questions or to take part in whatever discussion.
Thank you, Rich. Yes, so we're open for questions. I don't see any come up from the group, but let's see if anyone has anything they want to ask, even if it's something that's just the most interesting point. I know I do, but I don't want to start. Yeah, Yuri.
Yeah, I just have like a quick comment that it was so interesting for me to see how like two of the most high scores. I took notes. I'm gonna read a little bit. The DevRels focus more on quantifying the amount of new accounts and also the developer satisfaction levels. And I think that was so interesting because they often, and most of the time, they go hand in hand. Because if you have like a good onboarding experience for the developer, ultimately they're going to want to spend more time with your product, they're going to want to interact with the community, they're going to want to be more involved. So I thought that was really, really interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is part of the whole developer experience, and it's this kind of the satisfaction and getting developers to have a good onboarding experience really sets the scene for the rest of their engagement with you, and that will be their first contact, and it's a satisfied developer who will go and then talk to their friends and recommend this product and things like that. So this experience kind of forms the foundation of how you grow the developer community in some ways.
Thank you. We have one question. Uh, Maybe this I'm going to pull the knowledge from the audience. Any favorite methods for connecting GitHub activity into marketing funnels? So using the data that is available or can be available. Um, Anyone in the group that has experience and done that? Yeah, Cameron.
Yeah, I do. So I help maintain an open source game engine, and I had the same like wondering thing. How could we grow our community? How could we do it better? And so I've been trying out Common Room, which you can see is one of the sponsors for this. But I can tell you firsthand that it's really helped understand like how big our community is, and it provides us a lot of insight into like who's actually using our game engine and building games with it, so that we can actually reach out to them and understand like what's the makeup of our audience. And it's helped us with like our positioning and our marketing too, because now we understand that we're focused on like amateur game developers, like people who do web development professionally but want to make games. And so it's really helped us, but thought that might be useful.
Anyone else have another tool or method they're using? You want to add to that? No? Thank you so much, Cameron. Looking at the data as well, one of the questions I asked the group earlier was that, it's interesting. There's different sides of it that are interesting. One, the type of data that are most requested. There, data dashboards and raw data are quite high in the list, but at the same time, a lot of folks don't use data as much. I have an assumption that it was because um, it's not easy. You need resources, you need time. So there's got to be a really easy way to get it, use it, and make it actionable. And your teams need people and resources to do that, right? To do that work. I mean, is there any other reason that we might lean to avoid using data instead of, embracing this? Any comments from the group? Yeah, Wesley and Katie. Sure. Oh, I can give you the mic. Yes. Wesley, go ahead.
My first reaction is that there are various levels of maturity in a lot of developer relations programs. And some people, especially if they're just starting out, don't focus on data because they know that they need to create content, raise awareness, and just be able to have that library of resources for their community. And so there is more of a bias for action rather than bias for analysis and strategy. And so that analysis may come in the future after they feel that they have done enough to be able to analyze it. And there is a huge amount of, if we're looking back at the chart, there's a huge amount that if there is more innovation in some sort of area, there actually might be a lack of data on that specific vertical if it's extremely brand new. Like right now, there's a lot of talk about LLMs and artificial intelligence. And so polling and surveying may give bias or inaccurate data because there might not be the knowledge base to be able to assess it correctly.
Yeah, and what we do move so quickly. So how
Right.
fast can the surveys react? Katie, you had something to say as well?
Absolutely. My reflections on this fall into two camps. One is what I've heard referred to in other places is almost the blank canvas challenge, which is, and I think some other folks as we were prepping for this brought it up, which is, what is the question that we're trying to answer? And there can almost be a paralysis in that moment, particularly building off of Wesley's point, if there's that bias towards action of what is it that we're actually looking to do? Are we looking to understand the audience holistically? Are we looking to understand our unique audience? Are we looking to understand performance, movement through the marketing funnel? Those are all points of data through which we want to build knowledge, insights, and wisdom. And so where do we begin? And there can be a certain paralysis on that, especially if there are finite resources. The other can be the instance of time that if there aren't internal resources, or even if there are, getting in the queue, securing the budget. And so between the time that you have the question and you get the answer, what are you doing between then and now? And there can be internal friction of, do we really want to do this if we're trying to make a decision now and the data isn't going to be delivered? And so how do we fill in the gaps in that in the meantime? So those are a couple of things that I think through. I always like to phrase it as, is this a solvable problem? And is this a problem we want to solve? I do believe with the wisdom in this group, it is a solvable problem of how we can connect the dots and connect the data together more meaningfully to support each other through this when we have finite constrained resources. And so then it's kind of, how do we go from buy-in to that solution to enablement together to get to that solution?
Thank you so much, Katie. I want to circle back to that later on because it sparked some thoughts. Abhishek, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to stab on the GitHub activity question. So I'm not sure about the marketing funnel, but the activities on GitHub definitely helps in terms of product or the tool improvement. So for example, users using your product or in fact initiating discussion about a particular feature or the problem they are facing, I think it definitely helps a product team and the engineering team to prioritize the features or the fixing issues on the roadmap. That is one thing that I have observed that it definitely helps. And GitHub stars, I mean, I considered them as a vanity metrics, but sometimes depending on the location of use, I mean, we had done whatever data we got on the GitHub stars a bit on location analysis. So it definitely helps in terms of seeing the awareness that your team is doing where in what area you need to improve more. But it's just a slight idea. It's not, of course, it's more like a vanity metrics. But other activities, as I mentioned, discussion issues and PRs coming on your repository, whether it's fixing issues or documentation improvement, it definitely helps users in onboarding and reduces the friction. That's what I've seen.
Thank you, Abhishek. There was another comment, thank you, from Yuri. No, Ro, sorry. Ro has a question. If we can go to Ro first, thank you.
Yeah, hey everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm having a little problem hearing some of the speakers. Thank you, Katie, for your good comments. That was good, interesting to hear. My question, what triggered my thoughts in the slide deck was how we prove return on investment (ROI) for our developer relations efforts. And are we trying to prove ROI to our organizations primarily, or is it to other groups or what have you? Um, and as a question, have any of all of you folks ever had to prove your value to your organization and the return on investment from your DevRel efforts? Thank you.
A lot of nodding heads. It's like a rite of passage, maybe that that you all have to go through. Any comments? A response to Ro?
I can,
Yes. Yeah, Vera, you go. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, proving the ROI of your team's work for the companies is very important. And I usually say that if you can map out your metrics, your developer relations metrics with your company goals, that's the ideal situation. Usually in the DevRel space, there are two things that you can influence, like top things that are related to company goals, which is active developers using your product or API, or consumption, right? So those are the two big things or major things. In my company, what we use right now is something called output metrics and input metrics. And maybe you, Wesley, you are familiar with this system, right? Because we basically got inspiration from AWS. So for example, my team, the developer advocacy team, my output metric is the number of active developers, professional active developers. So developers who were active, so who were professionally building applications, who start using our product. So that's particular segment that we are working. But of course, we need to have other metrics which we call input, which are the ones more that you can control, right? So we focus on the things that we can control and expect them to influence this output metric. So the things that we consider as input metrics is events attended, people reached, content created, content consumption, and we also have another one which is related to our external advocates contributions. So my team manages the MVP program, so our success is also measured by the contribution from the community. And this is, very high level metrics that we track and report. Of course, there's other ones, but we try to, be simple, because if you had, a lot of noise, it gets very complex to explain your value. I hope this is helpful.
Thank you, Vera. Anyone else that wants to comment on Ro's question topic? Wesley, go ahead.
I wouldn't say that Vera is right on. What I wanted to do is just add a little bit of context. One thing that's extremely important is the emphasis sometimes on ROI is the company is putting it onto the developer relations team. And the reason why I wanted to point out the difference between ROI, proving it, and putting it on the developer relations team, but because sometimes in the structure of the company, it is their impetus to hire a DevRel team, but not know exactly how to use them. Mm-hmm. And so ROI in terms of reporting about how we're providing value may be misaligned with the incentive structure, because it may be made that they are pressured from investors, pressured from the C-suite, pressured externally to bring on a DevRel group, but not know what to use them for or how to use them. And so if we're looking at slide 11, you could see that there's a huge portion of the time that's taken up in strategy. And part of that is because it may not be clear about what DevRel is from the C-suite. And thus, ROI is a hard conversation because there might be a misalignment. So a lot, I would say the biggest chunk is to understand why do you have a developer relations team, department, and what they think it does. I could work all day into working on developer education of our product, but if they are more focused on conversions, then the ROI will not be realized. If they're more concerned with support diversion by creating enough good content to make sure that the misalignment between expectations and reality is there, then that won't work. So ROI is important, but the conversation should start internally before measurements and statistics are compiled and delivered.
Yeah, there's sorry, I'm going to ask if any of the comments that we have there are about the same question on ROI, or are they, yeah, Cameron? Okay.
Yeah, cool. So just like everybody is saying, one thing that's been helpful for me coming into like new companies and not having any context is I always think of strategy as being hierarchical. So what I want to do first is understand what the top level business strategy is. Like what are the top level objectives? So for example, with the client I'm working with now, it's awareness and community participation. Okay, so now that we know that we're going after awareness and community participation, what are the things that are going to move the needle for that? And then that informs what the objectives are for developer relations. And they have a very, very small team. So again, we're talking about the maturity of the DevRel organization. With a really small team, it's important to understand like how your work is going and moving up to that top level, and it starts by having good conversations with leaders. So it's important for DevRel not to operate in a silo, but to move across, to be like a gap bridger, right? To bridge the gaps between sales, marketing, executive, C-suite, and understanding that. So I think that is helpful to think about.
And I wanted to add a comment here, something that we're exploring. It's a little bit of a new white paper we're going to be releasing later this year. Is aiming at understanding and how we can help you all or anyone in the space actually create a number. So how we can measure what we would say developer lifetime value, developer engagement value for your company. It's, a customer lifetime value exists, right? So how we're creating, we'll be discussing that and releasing later this year. It's being worked on at this moment. It is complex. It's not easy. There's so many challenges with the different tech, the different product, where you gain value, where does the company obtain value? Is it with an onboarded developer? Is it with a sale? Is it after it's an enterprise level? How do you measure every time you have someone new on a trial and then it goes into an actual buy discussion or investment discussion on the enterprise level? So there is a lot to consider here, and there are so many differences between each of the organizations, I think, that you all have. I'm going to stop there because it's not, I want to go on, but I am really interested how, also, if something like that, we can definitely talk about it offline as well, how this would help your teams. What are you looking for to get that answer? Because it's something that will really help feed into this study. So definitely, if you're interested in talking about it more, ping me as well. We can come back to that, but I feel bad because I've had Abhishek sitting there for a while with a question again. Abhishek, did you get to ask your question?
Thanks for giving me the mic.
Yeah.
So my question was on the previous point that Vera and Wesley talked about input and output metrics, right? So as you mentioned, in a very big organization, or let's say mid-sized organization, which is bit organized, right? It's easy for setting up those metrics because you have different programs coming up, MVP and all those sort of things. But let's say if you have just started your DevRel team, or you're not even there. Let's say you came out of stealth or something like that, right? So how do you, I wanted to know on a granular level, how do you measure this metrics? What are the things that could go on output and input side? Like, will it be just going from the awareness and content perspective, or you would also consider number of developers using your product, or let's say, in fact, going into a production level?
So the output and input metrics, what else could we add there? Vera answered and gave some ideas on what they do. I wrote number of professional active developers, professionally building applications, for example, on output. Anyone else that has an example here for Abhishek of how you would measure that? Katie, yeah, go ahead. Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't see the pop-up, so sorry. Thank you for raising your hand.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And I saw an interesting comment, somewhat related from Ro as well. And I'm happy to share the approach that I've taken, which it's I would say it's not perfect, but I would like to believe it's moving the needle in the right direction. And I'm actually very excited to hear that an industry standard model is being created. Going back to the point earlier about resources, a lot of times, even if you have an incredible data science team, if they haven't done work within this space, giving them that starting point for this particular audience, which I think we can all acknowledge from this is not a straight linear line. It's not like someone comes, they sign up for something, they put their name in a form. You can follow them from end to end. And so the way that I think about it is going to, the starting point often is more of a corollary model, which is looking at, and people have different funnels. And Kamran, you're the one who did the beautiful coffee funnel as well, correct? If anyone hasn't seen the coffee funnel, I feel like we could have an entire meetup analyzing like our favorite visual analogies for DevRel measurement models. But it really is a corollary model, particularly, and there was a great piece of content, I'll need to look it up, of the likelihood of a developer giving their name into something or using their same login information one place and another place, which identity becomes such a complex thing that the ability to actually look at that input output for an individual throughout the funnel becomes really, really tricky. And so the approach that I've seen that has worked with reasonable success is twofold. One is looking at data in aggregate. And so even if you don't necessarily see a single person moving through, knowing that if you have a certain amount of awareness up front and a certain amount of engagement, that it will yield a certain amount of output. So that's one. The second, and this is more to Ro's point, is doing deeper studies where you're actually, from an ROI perspective, and this works really well in SaaS, where it's the hypothesis is having platform extensibility makes a product stickier, is being able to look at models of folks who are using integrations, who are using workflows, who are customizing a product and a platform. Is there a greater likelihood of more users being onboarded, users using the product more effectively, and so forth? So those are the two models. Again, it's not causal, it's more correlation, but I've found both of those reasonably effective, at least as that starting point to build the confidence in the value of the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Judy, you had a comment. I don't know if you got to speak. Or did I get you?
I have actually two comments. One was on his previous question about like GitHub stars being like a vanity measure and metric, sorry. And I've worked for a startup before, and we really used to be focused on like, okay, how many stars do we have? But you gotta think of it from the developer point of view. And for example, when I'm gonna contribute to a project, an open source project, I want to know how active the community is. I want to know how active the product by itself is. Like if I raise any issues, are they gonna come back to me like on a reasonable amount of time? So it's not very like a vanity. It's looking at it from like the developer side of things, because developers are more likely to get involved in the community if it's an active community, if they know they're gonna get the support that they want. So that's really something that, especially like startups and small companies like that really like invest time in, because that's something that matters, especially when you're trying to grow the product. And also talking about like expressing like your value to the company and like making them know that you're worthy. I think this is like a double street conversation. You know, this is not set in stone. They can have a very different definition of success today, and then like let's just say we apply a content strategy, and in 3 months it shifts. Like that's no longer like they don't want engagement, they don't want anything, they just want conversion. So it's like a conversation that needs to be had like every time something new comes up, and you're like, hey, are we still like aligned? Are we still like on the same page? Can we like go through this? Do you still measure success this way, so that I can keep on doing the best job that I do and give you the results that you want? So those were my 2 quick comments.
Yeah, I think that the bottom line in an interesting kind of thing for what everyone is saying is that how close do you actually get to the revenue stream? What is the core revenue stream of the business? If you really want to convince executives and that C-level, or try and see what connects closest to the revenue stream. If it's like supportive of, then that's what you need to really highlight there. It's so dependent on the type of business, the product, the tool, whatever your organization does. But thank you, everyone. I'm going to go back to Vera as well. Is this a comment on the same question? We can.
Yeah, it is a comment, but probably we can, move to the next topic, because we are spending a lot of time in here.
It's very, very popular as a discussion, and it shows how important this really is, and that there are so many orgs that still have these questions come up.
Yeah,
so
but I can share really quickly an example that we use that relates the results of our program with money, and that is a success. So something that we did right, because we failed in many others, but this one we did right. So a few years ago, we were a small team. It was just me and my boss, and we had a lot of things to do. Work on brand awareness, community, developer support, whatever, right? So we thought about launching a developer champions program, which an MVP program, to help us scale our efforts. So essentially, we awarded our most active community members, and we put them into a framework to help the community and help us. But the argument and the narrative that we did, of course, our goals were more ambitious, but our narrative was about developer support. So those recognized people would be helping us replying on forums, which was 70% of my time was replying to developers on forums, or pinging people internally to reply to developers on forums. So that would be our external army of people helping developers, and we would be fostering peer support. So we did the calculations about what the support costs we would save if we launch the product. So for you to have an idea, our average time to get a solution on forums by that time was around 3 days, 3-4 days. Today is less than 24 hours. And we don't have a person fully allocated to forums, because it works organically. So that is a success that you can tie, to money, right? Because you are saving support costs, but that is just a specific program, right? So if you want to, go into more, more upper things, you need to explore, other problems or other things that you can solve that will save money to the company, right? Or generate money to the company. So for example, generating money to the company can be, programs that you turn non-paid developers into paid developers, customers who upselled, or customers who bought your product or are paying for your API because developers are using it, right? So there's different angles that you can explore, but you need to understand what makes more sense in your scenario.
So many good comments also adding to Vera and in the chat. So there's a few things just to highlight. And Wesley, so let me correct what I said then. to the core business versus to the revenue stream. Does that help? Versus, because you bring up that the growth can trump revenue. So maybe my phrasing was incorrect. The closest you can get to the core business, is that better, or does that still not fit? Your thoughts here?
That works. I was just putting it out. It's one of those things where, once again, the customer for DevRel, their first customer is the company. And if they're delivering on what they think is value, but is misinterpreted or not aligned with what the employer or the investors or the C-suite or the board thinks is valuable, no matter how much you're pushing a rock up a hill that you think is valuable and they don't see it, it doesn't work. So internal discussion and alignment is the first thing.
Okay. Fair. And what Vera brings up is so important, and I'm seeing some of this in the chat too. Savings is important. So the money or the resources that are also saved in terms of sales staff, sales support, engineers, that, sales engineering and sales engineers is a very expensive actually resource to have in most companies. DevRel does save you money when you are using it correctly. And a lot of that Cameron mentioned as well, sort of comparing it to warming up a car, right? Very correct. Really interesting. We can stay on this topic or we can move on, but we are almost, how are we doing on time, Victoria?
It's at the top. You can see the bar moving towards the end. So move ahead, please.
Okay. All right. So let's open up as well. Anyone else with any comments, things that what was missing here that you would like to see in the next time that we discuss topics like this? You can bring it up here. Anything, anyone in the audience that wants to, and anyone in the community that wants to bring something up? No? No? We're good. Everyone's happy and satisfied. Ro, maybe you're like on your edge of your seat. Do you have something else you wanted to add and ask to the group? Oh, you're muted. Okay. Okay. Never mind. Put you on the spot. All right, then what I'd really love to see if we could continue the discussion. I'd love to continue this discussion, understanding as well, since, sort of, I know I'm plugging a bit, but I also want to use you all as a resource personally, is if you need, if you were to have a number or something that you would quantify the value of the developer to your organization, how would you use this internally? How would you use that metric? I'd love to hear from all of you if there's something that comes to mind. And if you had this, what would it empower you to do within your organization? How would it help you overall? Like anything from the group. Katie, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll definitely jump in here. And Leslie, I feel like I'm plus oneing and adding on to a lot of what you shared. I loved that perspective you gave about the importance of internal alignment, and it goes back to some of the initial framing of this session, which was, how do we do our work in challenging times? And not only is there that more existential question of, in flush, bullish times, like where does DevRel fit in? But really now, when it's about finite resources, like there is not a lot of wiggle room for that slow burn that everybody's talking about in the chat. And so to me, the value of that is it's not seeing the value of our function by having an absence of the function and seeing where things break. It's being able to show that there is a direct relationship between building awareness, enablement, trust, empathy, in moving the business forward. And I think that that's what we've all circled around here is everyone has a slightly different approach and model to it, depending on the maturity of the business, depending on internal resources. And if there's a standard, relatively universally accepted framework to be able to bring back and say, you know, if you have these types of touch points, if you have this type of NPS score and so forth, there's a strong relationship between that and stickiness. I think it gives confidence. It's instead of it just being this, you know, we're never completely siloed, and yet at the same time it can feel very neutral in a lot of ways. And it's like, is this actually having direct impact on business? We all know intuitively it is, and this now gives us that confidence to go back and say, this isn't just us in our silo with our, you know, isolated experience. This is actually the entire global DevRel dev programs community coming together and saying, yes, this model is strong and stable across different types of businesses, companies, and product offerings.
Wonderful. And it's one of the themes that I was interested in. We got into this. One of the themes this year in the last months is globally, not just in this group, but is, you know, we need to use data to make decisions today. A lot of things that happen in our industry could have possibly been a bit better if we leaned on the information as well. So, you know, and hopefully we can help you all also get access to a lot of that and use it and make it easy to use as well. Anyway, I think that's it. Victoria, can we pass it on and sort of sum up and close off? Because I see we only have 2 minutes.
That's fine. You can take the 2 minutes. You know, the wrapping up, I think, has been going on for a while. I think it's a good opportunity to just add, first of all, well, anything that wasn't addressed, that's for one. The questions, well, Rich is on Slack. All of our forum participants are in Slack. So, you know, we can continue chatting there. You can also propose your prompt discussions, ask people to contribute, you know, people outside of this group too. Anytime. So this is where I would propose to continue the discussion. And also, I think today has been a lot of knowledge drops here and in the chat. So I'm really happy that all of you could have joined today. We will also be sharing the recording and the deck with the graphs that Rich presented earlier. So you will have time to reflect it in your own private time, because sometimes I think a big load of information could be a little bit hard to digest all at once. So there will be an opportunity, meaning if you would like to follow up after, you can still get back to us on Slack. And again, if you would like to host any of the future sessions similar to this one, do reach out to me. I think we have a lot of great people here with super interesting ideas and expertise. So go ahead and be in the spotlight next time.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining.